Devlin Cross was 41 years old the afternoon he came home to find his bags packed on the front porch of the house he had owned outright for 7 years. The locks changed, and his wife's attorney standing in the driveway with a manila envelope and an expression calibrated to communicate that this was simply business. He drove a 2016 Silverado with a cracked windshield he kept meaning to replace. He wore the same kind of work boots to client meetings that he wore to job sites. Because the clients were federal procurement offices and logistics depots, and neither of them cared what his boots looked like as long as his proposals came in clean and on time. His name was not in any newspaper. He did not have a profile. The neighbors on Cresthaven Drive knew him as the quiet man who shoveled the sidewalk before anyone else was awake, and kept his yard the way his mother had taught him to keep it, not for show, but because it was right. His wife Simone had been planning this for 11 months. She had a real estate attorney, an asset discovery specialist, and a man named Philip Derrick who drove a champagne-colored Mercedes, and who had been a regular presence at the house on Tuesday and Thursday evenings for the better part of a year. On evenings when Devlin was traveling for contracts. What Simone did not know, what Philip did not know, what the asset discovery specialist with her spreadsheets and her county tax search tools had not found, was that the Silverado and the work boots and the cracked windshield were not the whole picture. They had no idea that 15 black SUVs would be parked outside her attorney's office on the morning of the mediation. And they had absolutely no idea whose cars those were, or what they meant about who Devlin Cross actually was. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning after Devlin slept in a hotel 12 minutes from the house he owned, he made coffee from a machine on a pressboard desk and sat in a chair that had been sat in by 1,000 strangers, and did what he always did when a situation required clarity. He started at the beginning, and he did not skip steps. His grandmother, Ruth Cross, had raised him in a 2-bedroom house in Virginia Beach from the time he was 9 years old after his parents relocated for work and could not settle into a stable arrangement. She was the kind of woman who had opinions about the correct way to do every task, and the patience to explain those opinions exactly once, and the silence that followed if you chose not to apply them. She had been a dispatcher for a regional trucking company for 27 years, coordinating movements across 4 states from a desk stacked with route maps and handwritten shift logs that she maintained in a penmanship that had not changed since 1962. She used to say, standing over whatever was broken and required fixing, "Devlin, you don't solve a problem by looking at the middle. You find the origin point, and you work forward from there." He had carried that instruction into his career the way some men carried a tool, worn smooth from use, reliable under pressure, never once letting him down. He had come to federal logistics contracting through the back door of a supply chain audit firm in his late 20s, identifying procurement inefficiencies in government distribution networks and submitting proposals to correct them. He was not the largest firm bidding on the work. He was the most precise, and the federal agencies he worked with had learned, over time, that precision in logistics had a value that the lowest bid never quite captured. There was a particular kind of trust that developed between a contractor and a federal program office, when the contractor repeatedly delivered exactly what he had committed to delivering, and did not ask for additional time or additional money to do it. That trust was not listed on any balance sheet. It was more durable than what balance sheets contained. He had incorporated Cross Logistics Group in Virginia as a single-member LLC when he was 31, naming it plainly because he believed in plain things, and because he was not in the business of impressing people who were reading letterhead. He had structured it carefully from the beginning. The operating accounts held in the LLC's name, the properties acquired under the LLC. A trust funded by a portion of his grandmother's estate when she turned 70 and had decided, with the practical efficiency she brought to every decision, to arrange her affairs correctly while she still had full clarity to do so. He had not hidden the LLC from Simone in the beginning. He had told her he ran a consulting firm. He had told her the work was federal contracts and logistics analysis. She had absorbed this as she absorbed most of his professional explanations, with the polite attention of someone for whom the information was not particularly interesting and who did not require the details to navigate her own life. He had not pressed the fuller picture on her because she had not asked for it. And he was not a man who performed his accomplishments. The house on Cresthaven Drive he had purchased in 2017, the year before they married, with a mortgage he paid off in 5 years from the LLC's operating income. He had retiled the kitchen himself over a long weekend in March, using tile he had sourced from a Virginia craftsman his grandmother had recommended. Blue-gray stone that he had set in a running bond pattern because it was the pattern his grandmother's kitchen had used, and because it was correct. Simone had said it was beautiful when it was finished. He had believed her. He had met her 9 years ago at a fundraiser for a veterans organization in Norfolk that he attended every year because 3 men from his mother's side of the family had served, and because he believed in showing up to things that mattered, even when no one was taking attendance. She was there with a colleague, bright and well-composed and possessed of the kind of laugh that occupied the appropriate amount of space in a room. They had talked for the better part of 2 hours. She had found logistics amusing in the way that people found things amusing when they didn't understand them but were enjoying the company of the person explaining. He had found that distinction easy to forgive. They married 3 years later at Ruth's church in Virginia Beach, because that was where it should happen, and there had not been a serious argument about it. Ruth had approved of Simone the way she approved of everything worth approving, with directness, without ceremony, and only once. The shift arrived gradually, and then, all at once. The late evenings that had begun as working late and had gradually acquired a different quality. The new perfume she didn't mention buying. The phone that had developed the habit of facing down on surfaces where it had always previously faced up. He had registered each of these observations the way he registered anomalies in a logistics report, not with alarm. Not yet, but with the practiced attention of someone who understood that a single data point was a blip and a pattern was a problem. The pattern had become a problem somewhere around month 4. But what had moved the pattern from a problem to a documented record was not Simone's behavior alone. It was the doorbell camera he had installed himself 18 months ago on a Sunday afternoon. A standard model he had mounted above the front door that recorded motion, triggered footage to a cloud account he checked periodically from his laptop on the road. He had installed it because 2 houses on the same street had been broken into in the autumn, and his grandmother had raised him to address a structural vulnerability before the incident, not after. He had told Simone about the camera when he installed it. She had said it was a good idea. She had apparently stopped thinking about it. He pulled the footage on a Tuesday evening in February, sitting in a hotel room in Raleigh while reviewing a proposal for a regional distribution restructure, because Simone had mentioned in passing that a package had been left on the porch. He had found the package. He had also found 47 minutes of footage from the previous Thursday evening that he had not been looking for and that established, with the objective specificity of a timestamp and a lens, exactly who had been at the house while he was traveling and for how long. His face remained perfectly calm. He sat with the laptop on the hotel bed for a long moment. He did not call Simone. He did not call anyone. He closed the footage window, set the laptop on the desk, and made a cup of coffee from the machine, and sat in the chair by the window and looked at the lights of Raleigh in the February dark and thought about what he had seen and what it meant, and what came next in the correct sequence. He was a logistics man. You assess the full scope before you moved a single asset. Over the following 6 weeks, he downloaded and organized 69 separate archived recordings. He worked methodically in the evenings after his proposal work was done, in the same unhurried manner he brought to any project that required precision. He built a spreadsheet. Date, time, duration, a single-line notation for each entry. The record covered 9 months of footage in total. 51 of the 69 recordings involved a vehicle he had identified as Philip Derrick's. The pattern it revealed was not ambiguous. He did not confront Philip Derrick. He did not change his behavior toward Simone by a single observable degree. He came home on the weekends he was scheduled to come home. He asked about her week. He passed the bread at dinner. He watched her occupy the space of the ordinary evening with the practiced ease of someone who had convinced herself the performance was complete. He documented everything. When the folder was complete, he closed the laptop and picked up his phone and called Renata Cole. Renata was the attorney who handled all of Cross Logistics Group's contract work. A 51-year-old woman who had practiced federal procurement and business law for 24 years, and who had the particular quality of never visibly adjusting her expression to accommodate the difficulty of what she was hearing. She reviewed everything Devlin brought to her across 3 separate meetings over 2 weeks and asked precisely the questions that needed asking, and did not ask any others. At the first meeting, she reviewed the footage log. She did not flinch. At the second meeting, she reviewed the financial exposure, a document Devlin had prepared himself, mapping Simone's asset discovery specialist's findings against the actual structure of Cross Logistics Group's holdings. The specialist had been thorough by the standards of a typical marital estate. She had found the house on Cresthaven Drive, the Silverado, and the joint checking account. She had searched the county property records under Devlin's name and found nothing further. Because the 3 Virginia properties were held in the LLC's name, and she had not yet thought to search the LLC. She had not found the operating accounts. She had not found the 3 active federal contracts currently in execution. She had not found the investment portfolio held in the trust his grandmother's estate had funded 6 years prior. She found the house and the Silverado and the joint account, Renata said at the second meeting. She did not find the operating accounts, Devlin said. No, Renata confirmed. She also did not find the operating accounts, the LC properties, or the trust. She set the specialist's report down with the deliberate placement of someone putting something exactly where it belonged, and no further. What she filed for is approximately a quarter of what she believes she filed for. Yes, Devlin said. And the prenuptial agreement, Renata continued, which her attorney claims she does not recall signing. Their characterization, not ours, defines marital property in language that excludes every asset held in the LLC and the trust. The agreement was independently counseled. We have the certification. Yes, Devlin said. Renata looked at him across the table with the direct, calibrated regard of someone who had seen a great many situations and had learned to assess them without the distortion of emotion. She's going to learn the full picture at mediation, she said. Not before. That's the plan, Devlin said. At the third meeting, 3 days before mediation, they reviewed the complete mediation folder in sequence. Renata confirmed the order of the document presentation. She confirmed the 3 provisions she would reference. She confirmed that the footage log would remain in the folder as a contingency and would not be filed unless the situation required it. Devlin told her about the vehicles. She paused for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "How many?" 15, he said. She did not ask him to explain further. She had known Devlin Cross for 9 years and had advised the company through 4 federal contract negotiations and understood. with the precision of someone who had read every document the company had ever produced. Exactly the kind of relationships that the work had built over a decade and a half. "I'll confirm the parking regulations on Granby Street," she said. Real power operated in quiet rooms. But sometimes it arrived first in a parking space. The week before the mediation, Devlin drove down to Virginia Beach and sat with Ruth at her kitchen table and told her the full picture. She was 78 and had been retired for 11 years and had not lost 1 degree of the precision she had brought to 37 years of coordinating moving parts across complex systems. She listened to all of it without interrupting and asked 2 questions when he finished, both of them practical, both of them landing exactly where they needed to. "You documented," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Devlin said. She tapped the table once with a single finger. "Your grandfather used to say you can't argue with paper. Paper doesn't have feelings. Paper doesn't change its story." She picked up her mug. "Go into that room and let the paper speak. Everything else will follow from that." He drove back that evening in the early dark with the clarity of a man who had done the work correctly and was ready for what came next. That night, in the hotel room on the edge of Virginia Beach, where he had been staying since the locks changed, he reviewed the mediation folder one final time. He went through every document in the sequence Renata had planned. Every figure was confirmed. Every provision was in the right position. 14 people in the world knew the full scope of what Devlin Cross had built, professionally and financially. Ruth was one. Renata was one. The other 12 were federal agency contacts, former program officers, and colleagues from a decade and a half of quiet, reliable work. People who understood what it meant when he needed something, because he never asked for anything that wasn't warranted, and had never once asked for anything at all until now. He made one call. He did not ask for anything specific. He said only the address, the law offices of Hargrove and Webb on Granby Street in Norfolk, and the time, 9 o'clock on Thursday morning. The person on the other end said, "We'll be there." Devlin said thank you. He ended the call and set the phone on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling and thought about his grandmother at her dispatch desk in 1987, moving freight across 4 states with a handwritten log and an unhurried telephone voice, building the kind of trust that accumulated quietly and outlasted everything else. The next morning he put on a clean suit, drank his coffee, and drove to Granby Street. They were already there. 15 black SUVs lined the block in front of the Hargrove and Webb offices in a formation that was precise without being theatrical, parked at regulated intervals, engines off, no movement, no visible display of any kind. They were the kind of vehicles that carried the kind of people who worked in the kind of offices that did not appear on organizational charts. 3 of the men standing outside the lead vehicle were known personally by Devlin. The rest he knew by reputation, which was its own kind of knowing. Renata met him on the sidewalk. She looked at the vehicles with the expression of a person confirming that an expected quantity had arrived correctly. 14, she said. 15, Devlin said. General Whitmore's driver parks around the corner. She nodded once and opened the door. Simone was already inside with her attorney, a man named Kellner, who had been operating on the assumption that a quiet contractor's wife was dissolving a modest estate and had organized his approach accordingly. He looked out the conference room window at the vehicles on the street, and then looked at Devlin, and then looked back at the window with the expression of a person recalculating a problem whose scope had just materially changed. Simone's expression went through its own sequence. Confidence, then confusion, then a careful attempt to reassemble composure that did not fully succeed. Renata opened her folder. She laid out the prenuptial agreement first, the original, signed and notarized, along with the independent legal counsel certification showing that Simone had been represented by her own attorney at the time of signing. A detail Kellner had apparently not been given or had not verified. She laid out the Cross Logistics Group operating agreement, the 3 active federal contracts, the Virginia property holdings, and the trust documentation. She laid out a 12-month timeline of Cross Logistics Group's revenue. $3 million in the most recent fiscal year, none of which constituted marital property under the terms of the prenuptial agreement. She placed the asset discovery specialist's report beside the operating agreement so that the 2 documents were visible simultaneously. The gap between what had been found and what existed was legible, without commentary. Then Renata looked at Simone's attorney and said, in the measured tone she used when she was about to say the most important thing in a room, "Your client's filing is based on an asset picture that represents approximately 22% of Mr. Cross's actual holdings. The remaining 78% is protected under the prenuptial agreement your client signed, and which she was independently counseled on at the time. The footage log documenting 11 months of activity at the marital residence was prepared as a contingency. We have not filed it with any court. We would prefer to resolve this without filing it." Kellner looked at the folder. He looked at the window. He looked at his client. Simone looked at Devlin for the first time since he had walked in. She opened her mouth. Devlin spoke before she could. His voice was even, the same voice he used in every meeting where the outcome was already determined, and the only remaining question was whether the other party understood that. "I'm not angry," he said. "I'm clear. Those are different things." He stood and gathered his folder. "Renata will handle the paperwork. Take your time." He walked out of the conference room and into the morning air and did not look back. The SUVs were still there. One of the men from the lead vehicle gave him a single nod as he passed. Devlin nodded back. He did not stop walking. 11 months passed, and the world arranged itself into the shape it was supposed to have. The mediation settlement was finalized in the 6th week. Simone received the equity in the house on Cresthaven Drive, the full balance of the joint account, and a 2-year spousal support arrangement, a settlement that Renata had characterized as generous given the prenuptial agreement's terms, and which Devlin had accepted because his grandmother had raised him not to use the full extent of what he had when the situation did not require it. He did not file the footage log with any court. He did not need to. Philip Derrick, it emerged through a mutual acquaintance in month 3, had discontinued the champagne-colored Mercedes and relocated to a smaller city in North Carolina following a business reversal that the mutual acquaintance described as significant and did not elaborate on. Devlin did not ask for elaboration. Simone sold the house on Cresthaven Drive in month 8 and relocated to a rental in a suburb 40 minutes away. Her sister had not returned her calls since the mediation, a fact Devlin had heard through Ruth, who had heard it through the sister herself. He registered it and moved on. Cross Logistics Group closed its largest federal contract renewal in month 10, a 5-year agreement valued at $4 million with a regional distribution network that had been in Devlin's portfolio for 3 years and had expanded steadily under his management. He hired 2 additional operations managers and opened a second office in Richmond, in a building he leased from a property group whose principal he had known for a decade. He bought a house in Norfolk, a craftsman on a quiet street 2 miles from the water, and spent his first 3 months renovating it the way his grandmother had taught him to approach any structure worth keeping, room by room, with good materials and unhurried attention, starting with the things that mattered for the integrity of the whole before worrying about what was visible at the surface. He planted a garden in the backyard. He was not a patient gardener by temperament, but he was becoming one. A woman named Serena sat on the back porch on a Saturday morning in late spring, reading and not requiring the morning to be anything other than quiet. She was a civil attorney he had met through Renata's professional circle 6 months prior, who had asked direct questions and given direct answers, and had told him on their third meeting that she had never found indirectness in a man to be a virtue that improved with time. She was present in the way that mattered, not managing the room, not performing ease, simply there in the way of someone who had decided to be there and had not brought conditions along with the decision. Devlin sat beside her with his coffee and looked at the yard and thought about a hotel room with pressboard furniture and a machine-made coffee that had been the beginning of the clarity, and about Ruth at her kitchen table telling him to let the paper speak, and about 15 vehicles on a street in Norfolk that had not needed to do anything except exist in order to say everything that required saying. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. Some men built quiet empires, and some men announced loud ones. The difference, in his experience, was always visible eventually, in the paperwork, in the vehicles parked on the street, in who showed up when you needed them to. He drank his coffee. He was not going anywhere in particular. That was exactly how he wanted it. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.